What happens when a proud franchise built on 17 championships decides to abandon all dignity and embrace the basement? The Boston Celtics, the organization that once defined winning culture and championship excellence, are reportedly considering trade scenarios so transparently tanking-focused that they make the process-era Philadelphia 76ers look subtle by comparison. The whispers are getting louder, the evidence is mounting, and the trade proposals are becoming impossible to ignore. Brad Stevens and the Celtics front office are apparently ready to torch their competitive reputation for lottery balls, and the Chicago Bulls might just be their willing accomplices in this orchestrated collapse. The unthinkable becomes reality. Let's start with the most jarring reality check in recent Celtics history. Michael Pina of The Ringer didn't mince words when he declared that being bad makes a lot of sense for the Celtics. Read that sentence again and let it sink in. We're talking about a franchise that has prided itself on never accepting mediocrity, suddenly being advised that losing consistently is their optimal strategy. This isn't just any random hot take from a columnist looking for clicks. This represents a fundamental shift in how basketball analysts view Boston's trajectory. When respected voices in NBA media start openly discussing the Celtics' tanking prospects, you know something seismic is happening behind closed doors at TD Garden. The most fascinating aspect of this entire situation is the cognitive dissonance it creates. How do you reconcile the Celtics' championship pedigree with purposeful losing? How do you explain to a fan base that watched Banner 18 get raised just years ago that the best path forward involves intentional failure? Anfernee Simons. The inconvenient talent at the center of these trade discussions sits Anfernee Simons, a 26-year-old guard whose explosive scoring ability has become paradoxically problematic for Boston's apparent long-term strategy. Think about how twisted this logic has become. The Celtics are considering trading away a talented young player precisely because he might help them win too many games. Simons represents everything that should excite a basketball organization. He's entering his prime, possesses elite offensive capabilities, and could contribute meaningfully to any competitive roster. Under normal circumstances, teams fight to acquire players of his caliber. But these aren't normal circumstances for the Celtics, and that's what makes this entire saga so unsettling. The cruel irony is that Simons' talent timeline doesn't align with Boston's apparent rebuilding plans. At 26, he's too good to contribute to effective tanking, but potentially too old to be a cornerstone piece when the Celtics emerge from their intentional wilderness. It's the kind of roster management nightmare that forces organizations to make uncomfortable decisions about their immediate future. Chicago's perfect storm of desperation enter the Chicago Bulls, a franchise so eager to inject youth and athleticism into their aging roster that they're willing to facilitate Boston's tanking dreams. The Bulls represent the perfect trading partner for a Celtics organization looking to shed talent while maintaining some semblance of respectability in their transactions. Chicago's desperation to retool around younger talent creates a mutually beneficial scenario that benefits both franchises' questionable strategies. The Bulls get to add a dynamic scorer in his prime, while the Celtics receive players and assets that actively support their losing objectives. It's symbiotic dysfunction at its finest. The proposed trade scenarios reveal just how calculated Boston's approach has become. They're not just looking to get worse, they're engineering specific types of deterioration that serve multiple purposes simultaneously. The Vucevic variable. Tanking with style. Nikola Vucevic emerges as the centerpiece of these trade discussions, and his profile perfectly encapsulates Boston's strategic thinking. Here's a player with legitimate offensive skills who can put up impressive numbers while contributing to losing basketball through defensive limitations. It's tanking with a veneer of respectability. The beauty of acquiring Vucevic, from a tanking perspective, lies in his ability to mask the Celtics' true intentions. Casual observers will see decent offensive production and assume Boston is trying to compete. Meanwhile, informed analysts will recognize that his defensive shortcomings make winning consistently nearly impossible against quality opponents. This represents tanking evolution, moving beyond the crude, play the worst players possible approach toward a more sophisticated strategy of acquiring players whose individual skills don't translate to team success. Vucevic can score 20 points and grab 10 rebounds while still contributing to losses, giving the Celtics plausible deniability about their intentions. The financial chess match the salary cap implications of these potential trades reveal another layer of Boston's strategic thinking. By moving Simons for Vucevic straight up, the Celtics would create $6.2 million in additional cap space while simultaneously downgrading their talent level. It's a 2-for-1 special in terms of tanking efficiency. The more complex multiplayer scenario, involving Jordan Walsh alongside Simons, would generate even more cap flexibility, $8.4 million, while potentially netting additional draft assets. Every aspect of these trades serves Boston's apparent dual purpose of getting worse now while positioning for future improvement. What's particularly striking is how these financial maneuvers demonstrate long-term thinking disguised as short-term moves. The Celtics aren't just creating cap space randomly. They're positioning themselves to be aggressive players in future free agency markets when their tanking project concludes. The Stevens-Mazzulla paradox, perhaps the most fascinating psychological aspect of this entire situation, involves Brad Stevens and Joe Mazzulla, two individuals whose careers have been built on competitive excellence. How do you ask championship-minded professionals to oversee an intentionally losing operation? The article notes the difficulty in imagining either Stevens or Mazzulla endorsing a tanking strategy, which creates a compelling tension between organizational goals and individual philosophies. This isn't just about basketball strategy, it's about personal integrity and professional identity. Yet the trade proposals suggest that despite any personal reservations, the Celtics' brain trust recognizes the mathematical realities of their situation. Sometimes organizational success requires individual sacrifice, even when that sacrifice involves temporarily abandoning the competitive principles that defined your career. The draft capital gamble, the proposed inclusion of second-round picks, 2028, 2029, in these deals highlights another crucial element of Boston's strategy. These aren't just salary dumps, they're calculated attempts to accumulate future assets that could prove valuable down the line. Second-round picks might seem insignificant, but they represent lottery tickets in the NBA's development system. Teams that excel at identifying and developing late-round talent can gain significant competitive advantages. The Celtics are essentially betting that their organizational infrastructure can turn these modest assets into meaningful contributors. This approach also provides flexibility for future trade scenarios. Additional picks, regardless of their round, create opportunities to package assets for more significant acquisitions when the time comes to re-enter competitive mode. The tanking paradox, what makes Boston's apparent strategy so controversial, is how it challenges traditional notions of franchise management. The Celtics built their reputation on never accepting losing, on maintaining competitive standards regardless of circumstances. Now, they're potentially embracing the opposite philosophy. This creates a fascinating case study in organizational adaptation. Sometimes the principles that made you successful in one era become obstacles to success in another. The question becomes whether the Celtics can execute this strategic pivot without permanently damaging their cultural identity. The psychological impact on players, fans, and the organization itself cannot be understated. How do you maintain professional pride while implementing a losing strategy? How do you keep fan engagement while fielding an intentionally inferior product? The ultimate gamble, as we analyze these potential trades between Boston and Chicago, we're witnessing more than simple roster transactions. We're observing a proud franchise's attempt to sacrifice short-term dignity for long-term competitiveness, using their opponent's desperation to facilitate their own strategic objectives. The success or failure of this approach will be measured not just in draft position or cap space created, but in whether the Celtics can maintain their organizational excellence while implementing a fundamentally contradictory strategy. It's unprecedented territory for a franchise of Boston's stature. The Bulls, meanwhile, get to play the role of unwitting accomplices in this grand experiment. Their eagerness to acquire talent like Simons provides the Celtics with the perfect cover for their tanking ambitions while helping Chicago address their own competitive timeline concerns. These trade scenarios represent more than basketball transactions. They're glimpses into how modern NBA franchises navigate the uncomfortable realities of competitive cycles. Sometimes winning requires losing, and sometimes maintaining excellence demands embracing failure. What's your verdict on this potential Celtic strategy? Do you think intentional tanking is a justifiable approach for a championship organization, or does it represent an unacceptable abandonment of competitive principles? I'm curious whether you see this as brilliant long-term planning or a betrayal of everything the Celtics historically represent. Jump into the comments and let's debate whether Stevens and company have lost their minds or discovered the ultimate competitive advantage, and smash that like button if you're as fascinated by this organizational chess match as I am.